Hello and welcome back. In this short video we're going to take a quick look at the new Denoise feature in Lightroom and ask the question, is it as good as the packages from Topaz or DxO, and should you still spend your money and buy these add-ons? So let's dive in and take a look now. So the new feature in Lightroom is the Denoise panel found under the Develop module and the Detail panel. And you still have the option of using the old noise reduction system, which quite frankly was pretty terrible. It was one thing that Lightroom was falling far behind with. But you now have the option of using Denoise. But it's not quite as simple as that, because using the Denoise option in Lightroom, it only works with RAW files or natively captured DNG files. And what I mean by natively captured is that if you're using a camera or a drone or another capture device that natively records DNGs, the Denoise filter in Lightroom will work with them. However, if you've photographed a series of images to either make a panorama or an HDR image using Lightroom's own processing, which outputs to a DNG, the Denoise feature will not work with them. So you are a little bit restricted in what you can do with using Lightroom's Denoise. Now, on the other hand, the other comparisons we're going to have a look at are Topaz Denoise and DxO Pure Raw. And to access Topaz Denoise, you need to select your image and you can go to Edit in Topaz Denoise. However, you've only got the option of editing a copy, and that copy is a TIFF file, so you can't then edit the raw file after you've done that. But if you go via the File, Plug-in Extras menu, and you use, instead of Topaz Denoise, you use Topaz Photo AI, it does in fact open the raw file, and we'll just ignore there's a few updates there. It will scan the file, and let's just look at the eye on this walrus just for comparison purposes. It uses this autopilot, which restricts the number of options available to you, but it certainly does work reasonably well. And in this instance, as it's capturing or looking at the noise option, we're not going to bother with looking at sharpening and the other details within this. We're really just looking at the noise removal option in this package, and you can see a before, which is pretty noisy, and the preview of the after, which is not a bad result. And of course, what you do then is you can output that to Lightroom as a plugin, and it's going to create a DNG, so it retains the raw editing capabilities. Now, the only problem is that we're going from a 68 megabyte file to a 251 megabyte file when we create the DNG. So it massively increases the file size. If that's not a problem to you, well then it's not a consideration. But if you're limited on file storage space, I can't understand why the file size dramatically increases that much, but that's the way it works. So that's how we can retain our raw editing option by using the Topaz Denoise option, but having to use Photo AI and not Topaz Denoise on its own. We'll let that finish processing and come back to Lightroom and have a look at the result. So that's saving now, and we'll pop back to Lightroom once that's finished. And here we have the Photo AI DNG file, and you can see that it has been processed. So that all works fine, but we do have the downside of having a much larger DNG file to work with. But of course, we can then go and do all of our adjustments in Lightroom as we would with a normal RAW file. So what about using DxO Pure Raw? Well, basically the same thing happens. If we go back and select our RAW file, we have to go via the File, Plug-in Extras menu, and in this case we'll go to DxO Pure Raw 2, and that will open up the menu. And the thing is, with this, you don't have a lot of options in terms of adjusting the processing settings with either Topaz AI, Photo AI, or DxO. So you've got options of which method you use, and let's say we'll use Deep Prime. We'll use the optical corrections and we'll output as a DNG. And you'll see here that it's going to export to a file that's roughly the same size as the Topaz version as a DNG. So we'll process that and then we'll have a look at that when it comes back into the Lightroom catalog. The DxO version saved and imported into the Lightroom catalog, and the DxO version takes considerably longer than the Topaz version to process the raw file. So just be prepared for a bit of a longer wait if you're using DxO. And DxO natively puts the DNG file into another folder under DxO processed file. So you have to then go and drag it into wherever you want to keep all the rest of your files. But talking about Topaz and DxO, there are a couple of other considerations. So we know that Lightroom only works with native RAW and native DNG files, and it will not touch anything else. Now, when we're working with Topaz, if we're working with a RAW file or a native DNG, and we want to use Topaz Denoise, we have to convert the file to a TIFF. But it will import your panoramas or your HDR files and again convert them to a TIFF, and will happily process them. It just means that you lose any further editing capabilities. And the same with DxO. It doesn't support any DNGs created within Lightroom, such as your pano or your HDR file, and it won't. Neither of them will touch. DxO will not touch a JPEG or a TIFF, but Topaz will. So you've got a few different options there for how things will be processed. And if you're generally only working with RAW files, that shouldn't be too much of an issue. But certainly some of my very old images were taken when there was no such thing as RAW files, and we had to work with JPEGs. And Topaz works happily with JPEGs and will vastly improve the quality of them. So that's one of the first considerations, is what files will work with each of those different packages, and none of them will work with all the different options that are available. And of course the other thing that we have to bear in mind is there is a cost associated with using the plugins. The Lightroom version of Denoise comes as an upgrade to the Lightroom program, so it costs you nothing over and above your annual subscription. But if you wanted to work with Topaz Denoise, you're looking at a purchase price in the region of $80 or $200 approximately if you want to buy the whole package that includes Photo AI, Sharpen AI and Gigapixel. So that's not a bad option to purchase the whole package. Whereas if you wanted to buy DxO Pure Raw, you're looking at a cost of $129. So it's a little cheaper than Topaz, but you only get the one program. So there's a cost associated with this, and that's a consideration that we'll look at the end of this discussion. So we've looked at how the different packages work with your RAW files and how they either create a TIFF or a DNG on the way through. But the most important thing really is how they perform. And let's have a little comparison now. So firstly, I've got the original RAW file that has no denoise applied to it, and we'll compare it with the version created using Lightroom's new denoise facility. So let's just bring them up side by side, and we'll look at the eye on the walrus and just see how the two images compare. So on the left is our original RAW file, and you can see that it's quite noisy and it's lacking detail in the fur. And when we look at the version created by Lightroom's new Denoise plugin, you can see that it's done a pretty good job of removing the noise and retaining a lot more of the detail around the eye and in the fur. But then what about in the highlight areas? Let's just zoom in here and have a look. On the left again, the original RAW file unprocessed, you can see quite a lot of noise, and in the processed version it's been reduced dramatically. And this image was recorded with at ISO 7200, so quite a high ISO setting on this particular camera, but still quite workable. So yes, definitely the new Lightroom Denoise plugin works quite well. But let's compare it now with our Topaz version, and let's compare to the Lightroom denoised version. We just have to pick up the right ones, put those two together, and let's have a look. So this one, whoops, let's go back to the eye. On the left we have the version created by Lightroom's denoise, and on the right the Topaz version. So they're fairly similar. In fact, probably the Lightroom denoise version has marginally more detail, but it's pretty close. There's not much difference there. Let's zoom out, have a look at the highlight areas. Again, both pretty good, nice smooth detail. So there's not a big difference between Lightroom's denoise option and using Topaz. But then what about the DxO version? So let's go back and reselect now the original raw, the Lightroom enhanced DNG, and we just have to find the DxO version. Let's have a look at the comparison. Zoom in on the eye again. On the left, our Lightroom enhanced denoise version and the DxO pure raw version. And I think you'll agree, just looking at this, that the DxO version has created a superior result. There's more detail being retained in the eye, there's better resolution around the fur, and it's a little bit sharper overall. So I'd say in this instance, the DxO version has given us a better result, even at the cost of a lot more processing time, but it's still giving us an overall better result. So we've looked at the comparison between DxO, Deep Prime, and Lightroom's denoise, but what about using Topaz Photo AI that gives us back a DNG file? Let's have a look now. We just have to find the right one. Photo AI versus the DNG Deep Prime. Let's have a look at those two compared. And again, the Photo AI version is on the left and the DxO version is on the right. We'll just wait for those two to load. And again, looking at those, there's not a lot of difference between the two. I would say that probably there is a slight difference in the DxO version, has slightly more resolution, but then the Topaz Photo AI seems to have brought out some of the finer detail here in the hair. Let's have a look now at the highlight edges and the hairs. In fact, the Photo AI version in some areas seems to have brought out some more detail. So again, we're talking at 100% view here, and we're comparing very minor differences. But what we can say for certain is that all of these programs do a good job in reducing the noise. And if we go back to look at our comparison of our unprocessed RAW versus the DxO version, there's a huge difference to be gained in using any of these packages to remove noise in higher ISO images. Now this is just one example, but it's fairly indicative of the sort of results you'll get. And you'll also get a similar result on long exposure images where there's noise from long exposure versus high ISO. You will get a similar result. So let's now think about what is the best option to use on a day-to-day basis. So you may not be shooting at high ISO settings a lot of the time, or in fact any time at all. But if you're a landscape photographer, you're almost certainly going to come across long exposures where you want to capture the beautiful light conditions. And this photograph was taken in Karajini National Park in northwestern Australia, and it was taken after the sun had set, and it was an exposure of 15 seconds. So we'll have some noise associated with the long exposure. And what we can do is we can go into Lightroom and we can do the denoise option, and it creates a DNG version, and I've already done that, and so we have the DNG version here. Or we can go into DxO or Topaz and we'll do the same things and see what the results are. So firstly, let's try Photo AI so that we end up with a DNG file at the end of it. So going back to our original raw capture, we go to File, Plug in Extras, Process with Topaz Photo AI, and let's see what the result looks like. And again, we're not doing any sharpening, we're just purely looking at the noise reduction option in this package. And it's detecting the image, and it will take a few seconds to process the noise removal option. Let's just move this up to the tree, and let's have a look at the detail that we've retained or lost, as the case may be. So now this has updated the preview. On the left hand side is the original capture, and you can see that there is quite some fine detail in the leaves and in the rocks, but when we apply Photo AI, it seems to smear all that detail and we lose a lot of detail. So let's just save that and let that produce the result. Again, we're going from 60 megabytes to 240 megabytes as a DNG file, but the processing is quite quick using Topaz Photo AI. And we're back with the image. So let's now have a look at using DxO as the option. So we're back at our original raw file. We go up to File, Plug in Extras, and we look at DxO Pure Raw, and we'll see what it comes up with for processing this. Now, again, we're going to select the option of Deep Prime, output to do it to a DNG, and again, the file size is going up dramatically, and we'll see what happens. Now, we'll process this, but I'll pause this and come back because it's going to take about 40 seconds to process, so we'll pause it. So DxO has finished processing, and by default it puts it into a collection, and then you have to then drag it down to wherever you want to put it for your comparison. So we're looking at the Lightroom Denoise comparison here. Let's go back here. So now it's time to have a look at comparing the various options. So starting with the raw file and Lightroom's enhanced version, let's have a look at those two compared, because that's our most important initial comparison. So just zooming in, we're just on this tree, or part of this tree area. Let's see if we can pick up. No, this is the one we were looking at. So we've got some nice rocks behind. So this is the original raw capture, and you can see on the right here is the Lightroom enhanced noise reduction version, and it's actually done quite a good job. It's retained a lot of detail in the rocks and brought out some more detail in the tree and certainly in the foliage. So that looks like a pretty good option, and it works quite well. Let's just go back now and pick up the Topaz Denoise version. Now, I've done Topaz Denoise using the plugin and the resulting TIFF, so for comparison. So let's just compare that with the with the Lightroom Denoise version. Let's compare Denoise and Denoise. So let's have a look here. So on the left again we have our Lightroom enhanced version, and on the right hand side is the Topaz version. And you'll see that actually the Topaz version seems to have brought out a bit more detail in the rocks, certainly in the foliage, just a little bit more. So using the plugin and a resulting TIFF certainly has worked quite well. But what about the Photo AI version? That looked a bit strange. So let's now go and pick up that one. We've got the Lightroom enhanced one, and we have the Topaz AI version. So let's now compare those and see what the difference is. And it should be quite interesting because it looked quite soft when we had the preview, and sure enough, here we are. The Topaz AI version, we've lost a lot of detail in those rocks. It's quite remarkable, the difference between the two. Topaz AI on the left, whoops, let's go back and pick that up again. Topaz AI on the left and the Lightroom enhanced version on the right, and there's no comparison. The Lightroom version is hands down a winner there, but the Topaz Denoise that results in a TIFF file certainly is much better. So let's now have a look at the DxO Deep Prime version compared with the Lightroom enhanced version and see if there's a difference there as well. So on the left we have the DxO Deep Prime version, and it looks pretty good, and the Lightroom enhanced version on the right. The DxO version maybe even looks a little bit too crunchy, but it's certainly done a very good job and then looking at the fine foliage, it's fairly comparable. So I think I'd probably say in this instance, using the long exposure version of denoising, I think the Topaz Denoise plugin actually gives a better result. So let's just have a look at that then. Topaz AI versus DxO. And remember, we have a DNG file. Sorry, I've picked up the wrong one. Topaz Denoise. And we want let's just go back because it picks up too many different versions here. So we have Deep Prime versus Topaz Denoise, which is in fact that one. So let's compare those two together. Just remembering, one gives you a digital negative file and the other gives you a TIFF. But looking at the two, I actually think that the Topaz Denoise TIFF version is actually a little better overall. But again, we're comparing things at 100%, and so the details are really quite obvious here. We wouldn't be comparing things quite this closely, but if you're really looking at an option to compare the results of various denoise programs, you really need to do a tight comparison. So without driving everyone nuts with all of these comparisons, let's just summarize all this and keep it fairly simple. So let's go back to our grid view of all of these things. So when it comes to dealing with high ISO images, using Lightroom's inbuilt denoise feature, it works quite well as long as your original file is a raw file. If you're dealing with old images that might be JPEGs or in other formats like TIFF, it won't work with them. So that's a limitation. But again, you're getting the denoise plugin or addition with Lightroom as part of your subscription, so it's not costing you any more. But if you really want to work with files that might be created from panoramas or HDR images, you're going to need to use either DxO or Topaz. And when it comes to dealing with the long exposure images, I think that it was quite obvious that the Topaz Denoise plugin that ends up with a TIFF file actually gives you a better result than any of the other options. So I would be looking at if budget was any money you want to spend, then I would buy both Topaz and DxO. But if I was limited to buying just one package, I think because it has overall a slightly more flexible interface and more file format options, I'd be using Topaz Denoise. But then again, DxO Deep Prime produces excellent results with high ISO images. So depending on what your usage is, there's a couple of different options there, and certainly Lightroom's new Denoise plugin, even though it is limited to some file formats, it certainly does a much better job than the old version. So I hope that's all been useful, and I'll see you again soon.